Kieron, we're doing it. Thank you so much for driving down from Brizzy to do this. And before we get started, I think this is a good time to let you know it is a bit of a privilege to do this with you. It's an honour. It's honestly an honour to do this. You're you're actually a role model for me. I do look up to you. You're a family man, ultra endurance athlete, and just an all round good dude. And I see, when we have our conversations online, the conversation we just had before this, it's you're a good dude, and I really do look up to you. So it is an honour to be able to sit down and have this conversation.
Thanks, mate. I know it took us a while to get here, but
like a year. Oh fuck! It's taken a long time to.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah. But we're doing it. We're having
are.
a conversation. So look, to start this off, with all my episodes, I want to paint a picture of who you are, what you've been through, what you've done, especially with your endurance feats. But I sort of want to, give context to your life, and I want you to sort of take it away and tell us, because you've had quite a rough upbringing, and to see where you are now, there is a massive leap. There's a big arc from what you were back then to what you're doing now and who you are.
Yeah.
So, if you want to tell us, especially with the video that you brought out, I think it's had 35,000 views, and it gives a bit of an insight into, what you've been through. And I'll put that all in the show notes and that for people to watch. But I sort of want to dive that little bit deeper into, how you navigated that.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you really want to go back to the start, my mother, she had a very interesting upbringing. Mm-hmm. It's a very tough and heartbreaking upbringing, and from that she got a lot of mental health issues that stems from her childhood. My mother and father, they were both born in the UK. My dad was born in Kent. My mum, and my mother was born in Wisbech. Mm-hmm. And but as a child, my mother came to Australia, and my grandfather bought a strawberry farm in the late 50s, and they settled in the Redlands Coast where I reside now. And but my grandfather was quite a nomad, so eventually he sold the strawberry farm to some family, and he wanted to travel around Australia, and my mum ended up going to a few living in a few Indigenous communities, and eventually when they'd had enough of traveling around Australia, they moved back to England, and I suppose that's where she met my father. But during that time, my mother was she was sexually abused by a family member, mm-hmm. and that really, I think that's what started my mum's decline, and I suppose when I was born, I was probably born into the worst part of my mum's life. Mm. My two older brothers had experienced, some really good times. But I suppose when I was born, things were quite chaotic. Mm. There was a lot of domestic violence within the house, due to my mother's mental health issues. Mm. My father couldn't handle it at times. A lot of it was, over money as well. We were poor. We were really poor. My dad was in and out of jobs. And when I say poor, I mean...
What does that look like when we hear poor?
Yeah.
And it's like, I couldn't afford rent or something. Like, what does poor look like?
Okay, so, for example, if you were to look in the cupboard, there wasn't anything in there. If you look in the fridge, there'd probably be a milk carton that had been there for 2 weeks. There wasn't anything substantial. Mm. There wasn't fruit. There wasn't bread. Mm. There wasn't all this amazing stuff in the fridge and the cupboard. So at times, if we were to have breakfast before school, You know, we'd get out the porridge, and then, you know, you'd pour milk onto the porridge, and you'd see the weevils that were in the oats. The milk was off. You know, sometimes we'd have powdered milk because they couldn't afford to buy, you know, full cream milk. And even going to school, taking school lunches, you know, there were a lot of times I'd either go to school without lunch, or I would find a tomato in the bottom of the fridge, and that's what I'll take to school.
So from very early on, it was very much fight or flight for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I was wearing hand-me-down school clothes. You know, if I didn't have shoes, I'd be wearing sandals to school. If I did have shoes, they'd have holes in them, or whatever it may be. So things, but I didn't know any different, I suppose, at that time. It wasn't till I got to school, you know, when I was taking like a tomato to school, and then everyone's like, why have you got a tomato? I was like, you know, I would deflect, and I'd be like, I'd make it this most amazing thing, and I'd be so enthusiastic about this tomato. I'd be like, are you kidding me? You don't eat tomatoes? So I think at an early age, I learnt to mask, I guess, how I really felt. You know, there were times when, you know, when we did have lunch, you know, we would have like a sandwich or something, but I would find my sister's classroom and I would stick it in her bag, because I knew that she wouldn't be able to sustain her day just having whatever she had at that time. I gave her mine as well. So there were days when I'd go hungry at school. But yeah, deflecting back to, you know, trying to be enthusiastic about this tomato, that's where I really learnt to mask a lot of emotions. You know, I'd go to school as a happy, bubbly kid with energy. But that was just to hide, you know, what I was actually feeling. And I had to grow up really quick, being that young kid. There was a moment, I guess, that really stands out, that really painted a picture of where my mother's mental health was. We were getting ready for school one morning. I'd like to say I was in about year 3.
It's like it just put, like, saying year 3 puts into perspective how young.
Yeah.
You know, how young you were to go through this.
Yeah, crazy. And I remember these moments because, as I said to you, I had to grow up real quick. I remember these moments. It actually feels like it happened yesterday. They're so vivid. And I suppose, you know, I think about these moments in life, and
like, they're core memories.
Yeah.
Stand out,
That's right. And they're very traumatic, I guess. But we were getting ready for school one day, myself and my sister, my younger sister. She's 2 years younger. And we had a knock at the door. And my mother went into a panic. Like, she started screaming and coming in the room and saying, get under the bed, get under the bed. Someone's here. They're going to kill me. You need to get under the bed. You need to get under the bed. And you know, for me as a kid, I'm like, oh my God, someone's here. They're going to kill us. You know, like, this is what I'm being told by my mother. So we're hiding under the bed, and yeah, knock at the door. And then after a while, it just stops. And then my mother's like, you need to grab your bag. Let's go. We're packing up. We're going to go to your grandmother's. And we end up walking like 15K to my grandmother's house with bags on a busy road. And you know, got to my grandmother's house, and my father was there. My grandmother had called my father. And yeah, it was that moment when I learned that mum was really sick. And it turned out the knock at the door was just a next door neighbour just checking in.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it wasn't too long after that. My mother and father, they separated, which was, you know, for the best, I guess, for my father. Unfortunately, the court awarded my mother the custody of myself and my younger sister, which wasn't ideal. So around this time, we had a family friend who was he was heavily involved with bikies, sold drugs, alcoholic, very abusive. I remember one day, he was a mechanic. I remember one day my father and I had gone down to his shop where he was working, and we get there and, you know, he's got a busted nose and busted eye, and he's, you know, drunk and everything. You know, he just wasn't a good guy, and he mixed around with a lot of, you know, seedy people. And yeah, he'd obviously been paid a visit by someone he owed money to. So I knew this guy for seeing him like that. And my mother, strangely enough, who used to be against drugs and alcohol and all that sort of stuff, she was attracted to that. So they end up getting together after her and my father split. And it was brutal from the get-go. I remember we moved in with him, and we were moving some things around, and I had accidentally bumped over his motorbike, and it was, you know, it was just a freak accident. And he picked up a wrench and he threw it at the back of my head, and it felt like I was walking on eggshells. That was it. From that moment forward, I had to be really careful.
To be exposed to that at such a fucking young age.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, like no child, like teenager, whatever, deserves any of that. And that was your life for that, you know, amount of time. It kills me because, you know, we've both got kids. You know, you would never put your child through that, ever. You try to shelter them as much as you possibly could. But, you know, I do feel for you. You know, you don't deserve that.
Well, moving forward, like, I wouldn't wish it upon anyone to have had the childhood that I've had. And there are a lot of kids who have been through worse things. You know, I was really lucky. I was able to, you know, get through it. But, you know, like my mother and her boyfriend, who eventually became my stepfather, they were always going out drinking, going to parties. You know, they would often leave my sister and I at home by ourselves. I remember one particular night which changed my life. I really knew where I stood after this moment, and I was in year 4, and they'd gone out drinking, and it was roughly around 10 o'clock at night. I remember my sister and I, school night, I remember watching TV, and we had a knock at the door, and I looked through the curtain, and there was a group of men, and I recognised one of them. He'd been around before, so to me, he was a family friend, or friend of mum's and my mum's boyfriend. And so I opened the door, and they ransacked the house. They came through. They took anything worth anything, which wasn't a lot. But you know, Len had owed them money. So they just, they took everything. They ransacked the whole house, and then they left. And I remember trying to call, you know, my mum, you know, come home. This is what's happened. And then they finally got home, and immediately, my mum's boyfriend launched at me. He grabbed me by the throat, dragged me down the hallway, and threw me through a wall. It was that moment that I knew I was in for one hell of a ride. I knew things were going to get real tough, and they did. It was a common occurrence on a weekly basis where, you know, he would, put me in a chokehold, or he'd push me up against the wall, and it was heartbreaking because my mother wasn't doing anything about it. She let it happen. And this went on for a really, really long time. And, it really affected me. And another occasion, they'd taken us to this, I guess at the time it was a bikie gathering or someone's house. And I'd fallen asleep. My sister and I had fallen asleep. And they left us there. This random place, they left us there. And I remember waking up in the early morning, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, in a room full of grown men passed out. I'd vomit all over my leg from someone who'd vomited on me whilst I was sleeping. And I remember just waking up in tears, screaming, like I didn't know where I was. And then, a lady had come out after waking her up, and she'd phone my mum and said, "Come and get your son, like come and get your kids." Like just the recklessness of that, it blows my mind to this day that a mother
treatment.
And so a lot of this stuff went on for a lot of years, and eventually, got to high school. Again, I was masking what I was going through. I was going to school, happy and all this, and it just wasn't the case. My mother got really bad. Her mental health was declining, year by year. It was getting really bad to the point where she wasn't even remembering my birthdays. You know what I mean? So, it'd be my birthday and I wouldn't say anything. And then later in the evening, I'd remind my mum, it's my birthday, she'd get so angry with herself, more angry with me for reminding her. And she wasn't, she never got physical with me. It was more mental abuse from her, like emotional abuse. But she used Len, who was now my stepfather, as a hitman. So he was physical. Yeah. So in a few instances, if I'd remind my mother, but hey, it's my birthday or whatever it was, jug cord, that was it. Straight to the kitchen, jug cord, whack. Like that was I can still feel that today. That whip. You can taste it in your mouth. And by the time I reached the age of 13, I'd been through hell. I'd really taken a beating, and there's a particular couple of weeks that led to one of the hardest moments of my life, most traumatic experience I've ever had to go through. I remember sorry, I just need to take a second.
Take your time. Like, seriously, take your time. And you got to remember, this is, as I said, this is a safe space for you. Talk about this. This isn't, there is no judgment here. There's no judgment by Jai, anyone.
My stepfather, he was never in work. He's always drinking, and I don't know how he got this job, but he started driving a special needs bus. It was the easiest thing for him to do. It was only for a few hours a day, and he would drive this bus, and as punishment for me, even not doing anything, a punishment for me would be for for him to take me to school in this bus with all the special needs kids. And I would beg him to not drop me off at school. Drop me out anywhere else, I'll walk. But he was always punishing me. And this one particular day, he dropped me right at the front of school. And I was so embarrassed. I hid on the floor. I was like, please just take me down the street, around the corner, just let me off down there. And he would swear at me, be dragging me, and he opened the doors and he just threw me out of the bus. And I remember just falling into where the gutter was. And I just remember all the kids was laughing. I just remember everyone laughing. Friends, I remember friends seeing me. It was really traumatic because I was already having a tough time at home. I really didn't need to be having a tough time at school either. And, and then obviously, childish school, teenage behavior, you'd get picked on, you'd start getting called names, you're this, you're that, because they'd seen me getting off this bus. And it really hurt. And that's what led to some really tough times in those next 2 weeks. My best mate, who's still one of my best mates today, he saw that I was having a hard time, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to wag school? Let's just get out of school. Don't worry about it." And I was like, "Yeah, I can't be here." And we spent the day running around, in my hometown, and it was really fun. I was never allowed out as a kid, so in that moment, I felt free. And he's like, "Do you want a 90-cent hot dog?" And I was like, "You got money?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll buy you a hot dog." So we went to the local service station where they sold 90-cent hot dogs. There were these massive hot dogs. They were the best. And he brought me a 90-cent hot dog, and we're sitting there at the service station. And who pulls in for fuel but my stepfather?
Oh, you fucking kidding.
He just ripped me straight in the car. And, got home. And, again, boom, jug cord. He threw me into my bed head, and I'd split my eye, just underneath my eye. And that weekend, I was meant to go to my father's house, and he was living at Burleigh Heads at the time. And then I wasn't allowed to go because my stepfather didn't want my dad to see that I had this cut under my eye, and he knew that he'd probably get his ass handed to him had he known what had happened. So they stopped me from going. And the following week, I got suspended from school for fighting. Again, stepfather just that was it. I copped a beating of a lifetime. And then they thought it was in my best interest that I'd see a psychiatrist because I was the one with the problem. They couldn't understand why I was so angry and, why I was playing up. And so they took me to the psychiatrist. And the lady asked me a question. She asked my mother and my stepfather to wait outside. And she asked me a question. She said, I want you to draw me a picture. Just draw me a picture. And then so I drew a picture, and I must have drawn like a face with a sad face or an angry face on it. And she goes, what's this? Why did you draw this? And I was like, oh, I just drew it. And she's like, tell me a couple of things. What's it like at home? Rah, rah. And I thought this is the best opportunity for me to tell her what had been happening. And I told her and she brings in my mother and stepfather, and she told them. She told them. She asked myself and my stepfather to step outside while she spoke to Mum. And as soon as I got outside, Len shoved me into the corner of this wall. And he goes, "You fucking little prick." Mm. And then on the drive home, mate, it was chaos in the car. Yeah, my mum and Len, they were screaming and carrying on. And we got to a section in Alex Hills, just not too far from where I live. And I just had enough. I was like, shut up. Just like, my sister and I were in the car. And he took his belt off and he reached around and he's just grabbed me by the throat and he's just wailing into me like he's just hitting me. And I'd had enough, hey. I'm done. Opened the car door. Boom. Rolled out. I had hoped that a car coming the other way would just clean me up. I was done. I didn't want to go through that anymore. I'd spent a couple of days in hospital after rolling out of the car. And then, I went to school. I came home. I walked into my bedroom and I tried to take my life. And I remember sitting there on the floor, just numb. I'd been through so much, and I'd taken so much on. I'd had enough. I was like, I'd be called worthless, good for nothing. You're not going to do anything with your life. I didn't trust anyone. The best thing for me in that moment was to not be here. And then after that moment, after I attempted to take my life, I went to stay with my father. And a week later, I was like, I want to go back. I want to run school cross country, and I want to go back. And my father's just like, I'm not taking it back. You're not going back there. We need to sort all this out. I was like, no, I want to go back. And then he's like, righto. I was like, I don't have any shoes for a school cross country. He's like, well, I can't give you money because you can't go get them yourself. I can't give your mother money. She's just going to spend it on alcohol or drugs or whatever it might be. I can't buy you them because if I send you home with a brand new pair of shoes, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Stupid. Sure enough, Dad gave my mum some money, hoping she would buy me some shoes. And sure enough, she didn't. She brought, a couple of bottles of scotch and, So I went to school. At the time, I'd been wearing these massive Doc Marten boots, steel cap boots. I've been wearing them to school for such a long time, and they were so heavy. And I was crying that morning. I was bawling my eyes out. I just could not believe it that I couldn't run this school cross country because I had no shoes. I was embarrassed. It was so embarrassing. And I remember getting to school. I had red eyes, but everyone kept coming up to me going, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And then I remember sitting on the sideline, and I remember we had whilst I was in year 8, I think it might have been, we had a year 12 rep that would come down, and she would always be there for us had we need her for anything to do with the school. And I really confided in her. I told her what was happening, and I told her I was so upset, and then everyone lined up. Everyone lined up for a school cross country. I just couldn't do it. I was too embarrassed to run in my boots, and everyone wearing their fancy shoes. And there was this one kid I just really wanted to beat. He was just the fast kid of the school. And I just sat there just watching them all line up. And then pistol goes up, and then bang, gun goes off, and they're running. And I was just like, fuck it. I'm going to go. Got up, boom, started running.
In your Doc Marten?
In my Doc Marten boots. And I ran as hard as I could. It was only like 3K, but I ran as hard as I could. I don't know. Something came over me in that moment. It felt like I'd been through so much. So a pair of Doc Marten boots weren't going to stop me. It's nothing. And I remember them just rubbing hard on my heels. They were rubbing so hard. I knew that I was getting some pretty messed up blisters on the back of my heels and the side of my toes. I just didn't care. Hey, I just kept running. And I was just trying to overtake as many people as I could. I was so far behind. And then I remember coming back down the straight, which is just past the touch fields near the high school. And I just gave it everything I had. And I could see the leader in my eyesight. And then I ended up finishing 4th. And I made districts, but I didn't care about any of that.
You didn't, no.
No one knew what I'd been going through, up until that moment. No one had a clue what I was going through. For me, it was a defining moment within myself. I was like, you know what? Fuck, you just did that. I felt invincible, and we're given opportunities every day, every second, every minute, every hour of every day. We're given opportunities, right? And in that moment, I had an opportunity. I could go down the path that, my mother and stepfather expected me to go down. I could have went down a path of drugs, alcohol, really had a shit life. Or I could go down the other path where I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do some really cool things in life. That's the path I want to go down. And I really had to, it was a real thinking moment, like, for example, I could take a drink out of this bottle of water and I'll take a drink and then I'd spill some, and then a lot of people would probably go, oh, look how much you spilled. For me, it's like, well, look how much is left in the bottle. You know what I mean? I could have went, look how many bad things have happened to me. Stuff it. Look how many, I'm still here. I'm still standing. Look how much strength I just got from doing what I just did. And I suppose after that, I became reckless within myself. I had two of my mates. They said, "Hey, we started boxing down the local boxing gym. Do you want to come down?" I was like, "Yeah, I do." And I went down with them one day. I knew that I had to be home straight after school. I went down to the boxing gym, and I jumped in the spar. And I just got my ass handed to me. My nose was all busted up and I had busted lips. But it was that moment moving forward that I was like, I want to box. That's what I want to do. And sure enough, I got home and I was in a lot of trouble. But I wasn't backing down this time. I was standing up to myself. And I was standing up against my stepfather, which wasn't ideal. He was a solid unit, and but nothing fazed me after that. I felt like this crazy strength inside myself.
Just like, we'll talk about it a bit later, but that resilience piece of, you have to go through the hard shit in life. And unfortunately, what happened to you was heavy. Like, there's no way around it. There's no sugarcoating that. There's no glamorizing that. It was shit. To me, I was trying not to cry listening to that, just because I've seen it in, with friend groups of mine or friends of mine. I've seen it. I've seen it fucking firsthand. And I get it. I really do. And, for you had the choice, as you said. You could go down this path, but you chose the other. And it puts into perspective the person you are, like actually who Kieron is. You didn't let the dark side envelop you. You chose the light. You chose the light. And it's so easy to choose the dark. It's so easy, as bad as it sounds, it's so easy to take your own life because it's done. No one else, it's your thing. It's what you chose to do. Do you know how hard it is to fucking fight that? Because when you're in that moment, and a lot of the listeners, some of them, told me that we glamorize the dark. We glamorize and go, you can get through it. But when you're in there, when you're in the pits, when you're in the trenches, there's no hope. That numbing feeling, for those who know about that numbing feeling, that feeling of there's nothing there, there's no hope, there's no light. You're in the pit. You're in that dark hole.
Yep.
The analogy I use is that, in Batman Returns, he's in that big prison in that massive hole, and he's trying to get up, and there's one rope and there's one big leap he has to take from that. I know he's halfway up and he has to take that leap, and he finally does it on the last go, and he gets out and gets out of that hole. And that's the way I look at it. And you did that. No one else did that. To do it at such a fucking young age, your brain is still developing. You're still, you don't know where you're going in life, and you had the fucking guts to change your life. No one else did it. It was you, and you got hats off to you. Really, hats off to you, because it's fucking tough. It's what you went through. I don't wish that upon any child, anybody. But you did it. You did it. And I think it's sort of, it's a good segue into that resilience piece and what you've done with your endurance sports, with sports in general. You did well with boxing, and then it seems early on you found running, like your first bit of that runner's high, that unstoppable. What's the word for that?
Yeah.
To feel like nothing can touch you, and it brings you into that running piece, and that's where I want to sort of dive into a bit more with you, because you've done some big things. And did you use your past as fuel for these? You did a 500 kilometer run, for fuck's sake. Like, that's
bowed out at 350 though.
You just repeat what you just said again. You ran 350 kilometers. You don't do that off, a year of training. There's a mental aspect to that. There's a mental aspect to all ultras, but you went through the shit, and how did you use running and boxing as a modality to come out of that, to really pull yourself from that?
Running, I loved running at a young age, and I'll just go back to a moment in '94, possibly '93. I can't remember. It's so far long ago, but my sister had pneumonia at the time, and so after school, instead of going down to her classroom, then walking out that gate across the crossing, I walked out another gate and walked across the road, and I got hit by a car. Broke my leg, and spent 6 weeks in hospital. When I came out, I was on crutches, and a friend of mine at the time, Nicholas, he was the fastest runner in the school, and he'd always muck around and go, try beat me on the crutches. So I was on crutches trying to beat him one day, and I don't know, I don't know if it was it was I don't know, a revelation or whatever it was, but I really wanted to give running a go once I was able to run again. And sure enough, yeah, your school sports days, I loved them. And I loved the feeling of being able to run. And I was actually quite a good little runner. I never beat Nicholas, but I would always place second behind Nicholas. And so running came at a real young age. I just loved what it was about. And it did allow me to escape things that were going on at home. And when I was in year 7, I suppose I started to get more into it. And I remember seeing these guys on the oval, they'd all had their blocks and, their spikes and all that. And I wanted to be part of that. So I'd go and train with those guys. And so running was a really good way to escape what I was going through. And then I suppose I got into high school and I was a little bit bigger than I previously was in primary school. And I just noticed that sprinting at school, I wasn't as fast as the other kids. And so I decided to give cross country a go. And I fell in love with cross country. Such a beautiful sport. So running had always been a big part of my life. My grandmother, who was over from England, she was staying with us for a couple of weeks. And she says, you're a relative of a very famous runner. And it meant nothing to me at the time. It still probably wasn't for a few years ago where I was like, holy shit. And she goes, she showed me a photo of Sir Sebastian Coe. And she's like, he's a distant relative of yours. I was like, and she's like, he's your mother's cousin. Because my mother is Maxine Coe. And so for me in my head, I'm like, yeah, running's in my blood. Like, I'm going to do this. But I suppose as I got older and I was dealing with a lot of issues, I never had the energy to take on running. And it wasn't until 2015 when I started running with Sam Weir in Ando that I really got into it. As I mentioned before, I'd been boxing for a long time, and then I was playing footy as well, and then boxing taught me how to. It was an individual sport, so it's I don't know. You really had to dig deep when I was in the ring. I had such mongrel in me. I was angry.
As you would be.
Yeah, and I would go to tournaments, and I wouldn't say I was the best when I first started. I was pretty bad. I'd go in there just swinging, no technique.
Haymakers.
Yeah, haymakers. No technique. I had stamina, but no technique whatsoever. I'd win fights, but I was just reckless. And my boxing coach at the time saw how much mongrel I had. He thought, well, if I throw him in with a guy that's heavier, he's not going to care. He's just going to go hell for leather. And then I started fighting guys. Like I was weighing into fights at like 69 kilo, 70 kilo. And then I'd be fighting guys that were like 78 kilo or 80 kilo. And then and I'd get bashed. And there was one particular moment when my boxing coach, he's like, right, next week you're fighting a guy who's 85 kilo. He's just come out of jail. And so you're going to fight him because he doesn't have an opponent. I was like, this is crazy. Like I was just like, I was a little whippet at that stage. I was tiny. And I realized then that he wasn't looking after me. It wasn't in the best interest for him. He didn't have my best interest at heart. So I ended up leaving and I went to another gym, and it was Philip No Deal Holiday. So this is a guy who's 6 times IBF world champion, fought guys like Shane Mosley and Ivan Robinson and Jeff Fennick. And he goes, all right, hop in, show me what you got. So I started sparring these guys. He's like, oh, no, come here. And then he worked really hard to get me to relax.
You've been fight or flight for so long.
Yeah.
To relax.
Yeah. It's like, what's that?
What the fuck is
that?
that? Yeah.
But he taught me what it meant to box. He got rid of all the mongrel inside of me. He changed my whole perspective on boxing. Changed my mentality. And I won my next 10 fights. Just from listening to him and learning how to box. And I thought to myself, I want to turn pro. I want to start earning some extra cash. We had a baby on the way. And then I don't know if it was, he'd rained me down so much. I woke up one morning, I was like, you know what? I don't have any mongrel left in me. I was more relaxed. I was calm. I just felt like I didn't have it in me anymore. And so I went back to play footy and stuff, but I really missed that individuality of sport. And then so when I started running with Sam and Ando, Sam had called me and goes, hey, you want to come for a 10K run on the trails? I'm like, oh, dude, 10K is not trails. That's brutal. I'd never done more than 12K on a road, let alone doing 10K on trails. And he's like, nah, you'd be fine. I was like, yeah, okay. So ditch work on the Friday and went down and, that's when I started running with Sam and I met Endo for the first time and I was hooked. And I said to Sam, he was training for and I was just explaining this just before, but he was training for Anzac Ultra down in Canberra. Which was 450 kilometres in the snow, raining, crazy. And I was like, man, how do you even, I couldn't even comprehend that. How do you even start to training for something like that? He's like, all you do is just go for a run till you hurt.
Fuck, he said the exact same thing to me.
Yeah, it's his only advice.
It's going to be over it will be over.
Yeah.
One foot in front of the other. If it hurts, just keep going.
Yeah.
Just keep going, and then you'll finish. And
yeah.
That's often running in a nutshell, basically.
Well, it's his go-to advice, and so I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a crack, and then I woke up one morning, told my daughter, my wife was asleep at the time, and I said to my daughter when she was watching cartoons, I was like, just tell Mum we'll be back soon. I'll be back soon, next hour or so. And off I went. I had no shirt, no phone, no food, no water, no hat. And I literally thought I'd be back. If not when my wife woke up, I'd definitely be back, for breakfast or at least. And I ran down to the boxing gym to say g'day to the guys. And then Phil's like, well, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just going to go for a run. I said, just test the legs. He's like, okay, well, he gave me some water and then had a sip. Off I went. And then, I just kept running. And then before I knew it, man, I was on the edge of the city, man. Like, I'm looking at high-rise buildings. Oh, fuck. And I'm just like, oh, my God, I'm hurting. Yeah. I'm hurting so bad. I'm burnt. I've got chafe. Yeah. I was drinking out of, park taps and I was sneaking around the side of homes trying to take a sip of water. Yeah. So they're all rusty pipes didn't alert anyone. And I was like, man, now I'm going to have to get home. And I'd started trotting away, walked for a bit, and I got to a shop and I asked this guy if I could borrow his phone. And he just gave me the weirdest look. I must have looked terrible. He's like, man, I'm not giving you anything. But he did. He let me call my wife, but my wife didn't pick up because she didn't recognize the number. And I was like, damn. So I just,
had to run home.
Yeah, I had to run home. And, man, she literally called the cops. I was gone for 12 hours. So that, hour of running ended up turning into 12 hours. I remember coming into the street. It was dark. She sent my boxing coach to look for me because he saw me that morning. And she's like, "You idiot.
Yeah.
I was so worried about you. I called the police." And then I was like, "I am never running again. I am done. I am never attempting that again." And literally, it was like a couple of days later, I was like, "Oh,
I'm doing it again."
100-mile race at Glasshouse. Why not?" And that was my first ever crack at a trail race.
Yeah.
And which was a big learning curve. I learnt so much from that run. I DNF'd. I got to myself, Endo, and Sam were running together. And we started like lightning. Like we were running like 4-minute Ks, man, on trails, on flat trails. We were just hooking. And everyone's looking at us going, "You idiots." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sweet." And I kept up with them for about 30 kilometers. And then I faded real hard. They were like pulling away. And I got to the next checkpoint. And I come in and they're like, "You're good?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm all good. Stood on the scales because at the old trail series, the Glasshouse Trail Series, you had to weigh yourself before you went out to do your next loop. And the guy's going, "You're right, hop on the scales." And I've gone staggering onto the scales and boom, I just collapsed. I remember waking up in the chair and I was like, "Oh, what happened?" And then, I was so dehydrated. And then I sat there for about 20 minutes until I was, felt good to go again. And they let me go back out again. And so that must have been about the 40K mark. And then I was sipping water out of dirty little pockets of water that was on the ground because we had rain the night before. And I didn't realize how sick that would make me until days later. I managed to get to 86 Ks. And, my wife was crewing me at the time. My original crew had pulled out just days before to do another event. I was like, "Oh, who's going to crew me?" And then Mel's like, "I'll just crew you. It'll be easy." I was like, "Oh, okay." So she crewed me with my 2 kids. But as I was running, I'm like, you know what? What if something happens? What if something happens to them whilst I'm out running? It's Glasshouse, when it gets dark, it's a scary place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I had their best interest at heart. I was like, you know what? I don't want anything to happen to these guys. And I was hurting. And I was just like, you know what? Easy excuse. That's it. I'm DNFing. And it was a learning curve. I just...
Well, look at that arc. Like from someone, it was... it was abuse. You were abused as a child, and then, look at what you're doing now. Like you sign up to these races, and it again, it brings it back to you. You did this. You as hard as it was, you brought yourself out of that fucking hole by yourself. We like to say people helped and all that, and running was a vessel that you used, and boxing was a vessel. But regardless of those, you did it. You did it. In the lens of healing, your healing. How are you now? Like, have you gone to see people? Have you gotten the help that you needed for that, or was?
Yeah, look, to talk about some of these moments in time and challenges, I'm not going to lie, it's been hard over the years talking about them. It's only probably now that I can talk about these things without getting, very emotional. It hurts to talk about, but it's definitely easy to talk about. I would go speak at events, and one event in particular, I was down in Melbourne, and I was talking at an event that 2 of my friends were hosting, and I just got so emotional. I got the words out, but I was crying hard, hey. And it was only because I hadn't dealt with all that trauma. I I hadn't dealt with it. I'd started speaking about it, hoping that it would help me. But the more I spoke about it, the more it just became harder and harder to control my emotions. I'd just get so upset. And it was because I hadn't really confronted, I guess, 100% what I'd gone through. I needed to get through that. And, eventually it led to me learning, which was a hard process, but learning to forgive. I contacted my mother. I hadn't seen my mother in years. And I received her email through my older brother, who had communication with my mother. And I thought, you know what, the best way to heal is through forgiveness. And I reached out to her. I said, you know what, I forgive you for everything you put me through, that Len put me through. I forgive you. I didn't want a relationship with her. I just wanted her to go through life knowing that she was forgiven. And I received an email back with an apology. That was enough for me. That was a huge weight off my shoulders. Massive weight off my shoulders. I didn't think I'd had the strength to be able to forgive someone for putting me through what they had. And as one door closed, another challenge arose, was me attempting to tackle other moments that I had never confronted before. And to be honest, I was only able to, I've only just now been able to talk about it. And when I'd been going through, those moments when, I talk about Lem being physical with me, my mum's boyfriend being very physical with me, and all those moments, Mum had left me. She'd had a gutful, and she'd left me with a family member here on the Gold Coast. And this was someone I looked up to. He was a bodybuilder. He was like Superman to me. So I was happy to stay there. This man sexually abused me. Now, going through what I'd been going through at home, and then having to go through this, I really felt worthless. I couldn't trust anyone. I was so scared to tell anyone. This guy was a big dude. I was so scared of him. And this happened multiple times over a course of a year. And this is something I've only just now been able to talk about.
And I appreciate you feeling comfortable enough to talk about it, because tell you what, that is fucking hard. That is fucking hard. Last year for me and my mates, so luckily for me, my group of mates, 4 of my best mates from high school, it all happened to, including myself. And only last year I finally fucking dealt with it. And it still lingers. I feel tainted sometimes. And I feel like, why me? But I think the biggest takeaway is that it's not our fault. It's not.
No.
It's never our fault. It's something that's happened to us, and I guess it's how we deal with it as adults, how we internalize it that will help us in the future. We may not ever get over it fully. However, at least, if we can talk about it openly on a platform such as a podcast or anything, a conversation in person, it gives permission for others to feel and heal, basically. So I appreciate you, being able to do this on here.
No, thanks, mate. That's Yeah, you're right. You don't ever get over it. It's always sitting in the pit of your stomach or the back of your mind. But it's a process, I guess, you need to take, especially when you do have a family. You're not just doing this for yourself; you're doing it for them as well. It's always about trying to become a better version of yourself. And it's unfair to put yourself through all that trauma, so many years of trauma, and you owe it to yourself to confront it and learn how to move forward. That's been the hardest thing, is learning how to move forward. I've held on to so much anger and embarrassment. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone. There were so many times I felt there was a great opportunity to tell someone, and I just felt so embarrassed. So whilst I was speaking at these events, I hadn't confronted any of that. Whilst I was up there speaking, I was thinking about those things. And it was making me so emotional. I just couldn't get the words out. And I guess running ultras and running distance, they've allowed me to grow and to adapt to hard times and to be able to think about a lot of things whilst I'm running and sort a lot of stuff out within myself that allows me to then go out and speak to people, tell people, what I've been going through. And even like over the last few years, even like doing running events and stuff, I can see how it affects me, because I do think about the hard times I went through. A lot of that motivates me. That's my motivation to get through most of these events. But it still didn't, something was still blocking me from moving forward. And it wasn't until last year, when I was like really confronting things, that allowed me to finally be the person I want to be, the athlete I want to be. I placed it, came third at the Glasshouse 100K last year. That was a big thing for me, because if you're holding on to so much anger and so much bitterness, and you're reliving all these things that you went through, it's not allowing you to be the person that you so wholeheartedly deserve to be. But because I'd started allowing myself, and I felt a lot more free, I felt relaxed when I ran. So it allowed me to push harder. So for me to place on that podium, I was like, man, you know what? This is fantastic. This
is a full-blown story of like redemption, of triumph, and this is why I do the podcast. I love hearing these stories of hell. You go into hell and back. You went to fucking hell twice, all your childhood. And it's great. It's not great. It's not the word. It's fantastic to hear. You're in a good place. We're never in a. There's always. We can strive for perfection. We can always go that, we want to be better, but it's great to hear that you're in a really good place right now. And, you're doing everything with intent to be better, to get better up here and physically, which is, some people can't do that. How are we going for time? Oh, we're good. Cool. We've been here for like an hour and 20, and it feels like, I just looked down, it's been about, an hour and 20. I think. Sorry, got sidetracked.
No, you're right.
This is a story. To recap it, you were a victim of domestic violence, and you were sexually abused as a kid. Those two combined, that gives any reason for anybody to go kill themselves. Anybody to take the dark path, addiction, drugs, alcohol, anything, and you chose not to. And then you have a look at the endurance feats you've done. It looks like a fantastic father, and you chose not to go down. You did. You're doing the work. These ultra endurance runs, yeah, like they help. But you've got such a good support network around. You've got a community there, and that's all you can ask for, and that's all you can really do. And especially in your case, it's fucking hats off to you.
Yeah.
Really.
Thanks, mate.
So, I bring to, sort of land this, bring us back up, bring us back down, whatever, which way you want to do it. I always ask, 2 questions. For the person out there that has gone through what you've been through, or worse, or less, what is your message to them? What is something that you can give them that could be of value? If it lands, it lands. If it doesn't, it doesn't. What is something you can give that person in the fucking hole to help themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a hard question to answer. Perseverance. It's, I guess, weighing up what you've been through and drawing strength from that. That is the ultimate thing you can do. The difference between suffering and, forget about the suffering side of things. What strength did you draw from that?
Jeez. It's loud.
It's great.
How does that work on the... Can they hear that?
Really no big deal for me. Couldn't care less.
Yeah, I don't care. Let's keep going.
It's not even a motorbike, it's a lawnmower.
Us keep going. Fuck it. Makes it more real and raw.
Yeah, it's no big deal. Yeah, so it's you got to forget the things that you've not forget what you've been through, but when you're trying to get better and trying to get help, you need to look at the strength that you gain from those experiences. That's what's going to get you back up. That's what made me stand up after trying to take my life. I thought, well, hell, I've been to hell. I can't go any lower. The only thing for me to do then was to rebuild something that had been crumbling for years. And it was a strength I drew from what I'd been through that allowed me to stand back up and say, well, hey, that's not the life I want. What defines me is what I'm going to do next. That's what defines me as a person. What defines you? You need to find that defining moment.
That's nice.
Yeah,
it's good. And the other question, and it's a new one, and I think puts it back on you. What is something you wish people knew about you? Can be anything. Really, something that you wish my audience or the friends and family around you knew about you.
I love 50s music.
Nice.
I love Bing Crosby. There's a real soft side to me. Like, this is where social media, I guess, comes into play. What you see on social media doesn't represent that person. What I put up and post, I try to be as real as I can, especially some of the things that I write about. And I try being my true self on social media. However, I might come across like I'm this super energetic, super charisma,
Mega dad.
yeah, like love going to events and love doing this and love doing that. And man, I am such an introvert. Such an introvert.
That's why we get along so well.
Oh, I don't like venturing out into crowds. I don't do crowds well. I get real bad anxiety heading into crowds or events, even barbecues or parties that I get invited to. I don't go. I feel more comfortable just being in my own space. I'm a real family man. Love spending time with my kids. But I know a lot of people that they definitely think that I'm this person who just loves going out and the life of the party, and don't get me wrong, I love hanging out with a good group of friends and having a couple of beers and relaxing and chilled out music. But there's a big part of me that just loves chilling at home, going for a run,
just being you.
It's where I'm most comfortable. So I guess that's something a lot of people don't realize.
That's good.
Yeah, and I suppose when we made the Finding Salvation doco, I really wanted to talk about what sort of person I was, because there were years where I had, flown here and flown there and done like little events and stuff, and I hated it. I just hated it. So yeah, now I'm in a place where I'm able to just be me, it's good. It's good to be yourself.
Good, man.
Yeah.
Look, I know we've gone way over time here. Sorry. But yeah, look, I just want to end this with a massive just thank you for sharing that. It's tough to share any of that. What you're doing, who you are. Again, as I said, I aspire to be like you in my own way. You've gone through hell, you've come back, you went back there again, and then you've come back and look at the person you are now. It seems like you're in a good place, and things change. As I've said before, there's many seasons in life, and might get cold quite soon, might get hot. We don't know. Right, yeah. So we just ride the wave. So yeah, look, appreciate you driving to do this and opening up about that and really talking about that, and take some fucking guts to do that. And yeah, hats off to you. And
thanks, Kent. What you're doing with the podcast, mate. Yeah, I've wanted to be on this podcast for a long time, and you're definitely reaching the souls of people. Mm-hmm. I've always heard good things. You've definitely saved lives, mate. And credit to yourself for opening up such a space, for people like myself, to come here, share their story, and hope, encourage and inspire other people who are going through these things. And you've done that over and over and over the last couple of years. So, credit to yourself. And yeah, I really thank you for having me.
No, thank you.
Cheers, mate.